A playwright in a brutally controlled city risks everything to expose the regime's lies. As her secret play inspires an underground rebellion, betrayal, surveillance, and rising unrest push her hand, the city toward a dangerous awakening.
The city was a patchwork of shadows and light, fractured by walls both visible and unseen. From my small apartment window, the skyline stretched out like a broken dream, towering buildings split by colossal barriers, the harsh lines of government propaganda billboards, and the ever-watchful eyes of surveillance drones that traced slow, humming circuits in the low sky. The air tasted stale with fear, heavy with the silence forced upon us. I have lived all my life in this divided place, a city where every whispered word is a risk, and every act of expression a rebellion. My name is Alara, and I am an aspiring playwright. The dream that keeps me awake at night is simple yet dangerous: to write a play that tells the truth about corruption, about the lies that choke our streets and the silence that suffocates our voices. It is a dream born from the ashes of my family's past activists who dared to speak out and were silenced. Their stories haunt me, fuel me. Tonight, the city is unusually quiet. I sit by the cracked window, watching the faint glow of street lamps flicker against the cold concrete. A drone passes overhead, its mechanical whir a chilling reminder of the eyes everywhere. I clutch my notebook, its pages filled with the beginnings of a script I dare not share aloud. Every word is a spark, every sentence a small act of defiance. The room around me is sparse: a wooden desk, a battered chair, and a single candle that casts flickering shadows on the peeling walls. I write by its trembling light, the scratch of my pen breaking the oppressive silence. Outside, the muffled footsteps of government patrols echo down the street, punctuated by distant shouts and the occasional clang of metal barriers being locked. I think back to the day I first dared to dream of this play. It was in the university library, a rare refuge where banned books and forbidden ideas still found their way into my hands. I read about other revolutions, other voices that refused to be silenced. But here, in my city, the cost of speaking out is swift and brutal. Friends have disappeared, neighbors arrested in the dead of night, their fates swallowed by the regime's iron grip. Yet I cannot turn away. The stories of my family, the quiet courage of those who resist in small ways, whisper to me. My father's arrest, my mother's whispered warnings, they live in every line I write. The city's fractures are deeper than concrete walls. They run through our hearts, our trust, our very sense of self. Tonight, as I write, I hear voices below, neighbors speaking in hushed tones about the latest crackdowns, about friends who have vanished. Fear ripples through me like a cold wind. The knock on my door startles me, a sharp rap that sends my heart racing. I freeze, the notebook pressed to my chest, weighing the risk of answering. It could be a friend, or it could be the authorities come to snuff out the smallest hint of dissent. I do not open. Instead, I slip the notebook under the floorboard, breathe steady, and wait. The knock comes again, softer this time, then fades into the night. The silence that follows is thick, but inside me, a fire burns brighter. This city may be divided, its voices silenced, but I will find a way to break through the curtain of fear. Tomorrow, I will write again. Tomorrow, I will take another step toward a truth that refuses to be hidden. And in this quiet, broken city, I will begin to weave the story that might one day change everything. The night stretches on, and I feel the weight of what lies ahead: the dangers, the betrayals, the sacrifices. But also the fragile hope that art still holds power, that a single voice can become a chorus. My fingers tremble over the pen as I continue to write, each word a promise to the silenced, a challenge to the oppressors. The city sleeps under the watchful gaze of the regime, but I, Alara, will not be silent. Not tonight, not ever. The rain persisted through the early hours, tapping steadily against the window pane of Alara's small apartment, as if the city itself whispered the secrets she dared to write. She sat hunched over the rickety wooden table, a solitary candle flickering in front of her, casting long shadows across the scattered pages of her script. Each line she penned was a silent rebellion, a crack in the iron veil that smothered her city. Her pen hovered, hesitated, then scratched out a phrase with a frustrated sigh. The words had to be precise, sharp enough to cut through the haze of propaganda, yet veiled enough to avoid immediate detection. Her mind churned with the stories she'd witnessed. Friends disappeared in the night, voices silenced without trace. Yet in the quiet of this room, a flicker of hope ignited. The play was more than a script, it was a beacon for those too afraid to speak. But the risks were immense. Surveillance cameras blinked from street corners, government agents prowled the alleyways, and one misstep could mean imprisonment or worse. A soft knock at the door startled her. Alara's heart quickened, fingers tightening around the pen. She moved to the peephole, her sharp eyes piercing the darkness. Milo stood there, rain-slicked hair clinging to his forehead, a cautious smile breaking through the tension etched on his face. He pushed the door open quietly, stepping inside, the scent of wet earth following him. "You shouldn't have come out in this," Alara whispered, pulling him inside. Milo shrugged off his soaked coat, revealing a worn satchel slung over one shoulder. "Neither should you, hiding behind candlelight like a ghost," he replied softly. "But we both know hiding won't keep us safe." They settled at the table, the dim light revealing the tired lines on Milo's face, lines carved by years of silenced truth and stolen words. His eyes, however, still burned with the same fire that had fueled his journalism before the regime had clipped his wings. He produced a small, encrypted device from his satchel, placing it carefully next to Alara's scattered pages. "This will help us communicate safely," Milo explained, voice low but steady. "No more whispered messages through dead drops or coded phrases in public." Alara's fingers brushed the device, a tangible symbol of their fragile resistance. "Thank you," she murmured. "Every safeguard counts." For hours they pored over the script, Milo providing insights on how to weave their message into the play's narrative without drawing immediate suspicion. Their collaboration was a delicate dance, balancing truth and subterfuge. As they worked, memories surfaced, shared stories of past protests, of friends lost, of silenced voices. These recollections strengthened their bond, anchoring their resolve. Yet, even in this small sanctuary, the oppressive weight of the city pressed in. The faint hum of distant sirens, the occasional drone of government patrols, and the ever-present shadow of Inspector Drax's watchful gaze reminded them that their efforts were perilous. At one point, a sudden noise outside caused them both to freeze, breathing shallow, hearts racing. When the sound subsided, Milo whispered, "We must be more careful. The eyes in this city are everywhere." Alara nodded, her sharp eyes reflecting a steely determination. "Then we write not just for ourselves, but for those who can't. For the silenced." The night deepened, but their spirits remained unyielding. As dawn threatened the horizon, Alara found herself standing by the cracked window, gazing out at the gray cityscape. The streets below were silent, but the undercurrent of unrest pulsed beneath the surface. Somewhere out there, others like her waited for a spark. She clenched her fists, the weight of fear tempered by an unshakable hope. "This play will be our voice," she vowed silently. "And we will not be silenced." As the first light of morning crept into the room, Alara returned to her table, her pen poised once more. The whispers of rebellion had begun, and there was no turning back. The rain had started again, a steady drizzle tapping on the worn window panes of Amina's cafe, muffling the city's usual cacophony into a quiet hum. Inside the back room, the air was thick with a mixture of cigarette smoke, the faint scent of coffee, and something less tangible, an undercurrent of fear, wrapped tightly around a fragile thread of hope. Alara sat on a creaky wooden chair, script folded in her lap, her sharp eyes flicking between the faces gathered around the battered table. Milo leaned forward, his casual dress a stark contrast to the tension in his taut jaw, while Nina, vibrant as ever, tapped her fingers against the surface, eyes alight with restless energy. "You have to say it with more fire," Nina, Alara whispered, voice trembling slightly as she pointed to a line on the page. "This isn't just a play, it's our voice. We can't afford to sound like we're afraid." Nina's expressive face softened, a spark of understanding kindling in her eyes. "I get it," she said quietly, "but sometimes it feels like the walls are closing in." Alara like the whole city is holding its breath, waiting for us to slip up. Milo chuckled softly, a sound that did little to ease the tension. That's the point, isn't it? We're supposed to unsettle them. Alara looked down at the script again, fingers tracing the words she had poured herself into, every line a stitch in the tapestry of defiance she was trying to weave. The play was more than a story, it was a mirror held up to the city's darkest corners, a challenge to the iron grip of censorship. The door creaked slightly, and Amina's quiet voice drifted in from the caf beyond. You two need to keep it down, she warned softly. They were watching. Always watching. Nina rolled her eyes but lowered her voice. We know that. Doesn't mean we have to live like it. Alara felt a pang of admiration for Nina's bravery, tinged with apprehension. The girl's impulsiveness was both a lifeline and a liability. Mello caught her gaze and nodded reassuringly, his presence a steady anchor amid the storm of emotions. As the group rehearsed, voices low but charged with meaning, Alara's mind churned with a mixture of excitement and dread. Each whispered word was a small act of rebellion, but the stakes were impossibly high. The city outside was a maze of surveillance and suspicion, and one wrong move could unravel everything. Tensions flared when Nina challenged a line Alara had written, arguing it lacked the urgency the story demanded. Milo sided with Alara, cautioning that pushing too hard might draw unwanted attention. The debate grew heated, voices barely contained, until Alara retreated to the corner, heart pounding beneath the weight of responsibility. She closed her eyes, the distant wail of a siren threading through the rain-soaked night, and questioned whether she could hold this fragile coalition together. The play was a beacon, but could it survive the shadows gathering around them? Minutes later, the trio clustered once more, the flickering lamp casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. The rehearsal resumed, voices waving together, fragile yet defiant. When the night finally drew to a close, they stepped cautiously into the cold embrace of the city, the quiet terror of discovery pressing on them as heavily as the rain on their coats. Alara's resolve hardened. This was only the beginning. The shadows might be gathering, but so was their strength. And somewhere, beneath the broken curtain of fear, a new light was starting to shine. I sat quietly in the dim light of my apartment, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of the street lamps filtering through the cracked window. In my hands I held an old photograph, the edges yellowed and curling, the image faded but unmistakable. My parents stood side by side, their faces proud and defiant, hands clutching protest signs emblazoned with words that had since been erased from public memory. The words freedom and truth were smeared and torn, much like the city we lived in now. Outside, the city pulsed with a restless energy, but inside me, a storm brewed, one of grief, memory, and a fierce determination that I could no longer ignore. It was a weight I carried daily, the legacy of a family silenced, voices muted by a regime that feared the power of dissent. My parents had paid the ultimate price, for their activism disappeared without a trace, their stories buried beneath layers of government lies. Yet their courage lived on in me, a quiet flame flickering in the shadows of oppression. But the past was not the only fracture I had to face. My brother Joran was a living reminder of the city's division. Once close, our paths had diverged sharply. He had chosen to work within the very government machine that sought to suppress the truth I was desperate to expose. The last time we spoke, it was on a cold, unforgiving night in an alley far from prying eyes. His face was shadowed, his eyes hard but haunted. You don't understand what you were risking, Alara, he had said, voice low but urgent. This isn't just about your ideals. It's about survival. You could lose everything, your freedom, your life. I looked at him then, the brother I once knew and the man he had become. And what about the lives we lose if we stay silent? I whispered back, what about the truth buried beneath their lies? Our conversation ended with no resolution, only the bitter taste of estrangement. As he disappeared into the darkness, I felt the full weight of our fractured family, the personal costs of political allegiance. It was a chasm I could not ignore. Later that evening, I found myself sifting through a dusty box tucked away beneath my bed. Inside lay letters, newspaper clippings, and faded flyers, remnants of my parents' fight for justice. Each piece told a story of hope and sacrifice. The brittle paper cracked beneath my fingers as I read their words, their dreams etched in ink now nearly erased by time. The memories they evoked were painful but necessary. They fueled the fire within me, a reminder that the fight for truth was not mine alone. It was woven into the very fabric of my family's history. Yet this legacy was both a burden and a beacon. It gave me strength, but it also deepened my solitude. The very people I loved were now divided by fear and survival. As dawn crept over the city skyline, I stood at the window watching the broken streets below. The city was a mosaic of silence and whispers, of hidden defiance and open repression. In that moment, I understood that my journey was no longer just about art or politics, it was about healing the fractures within myself and my family, even if that meant walking the path alone. The door creaked softly behind me, and I turned to see a figure standing in the shadows. It was Joran, hesitant, vulnerable. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. I met his gaze, the years of pain and love swirling between us like a fragile thread. "Then maybe it's time we find a way to fight together," I replied, hope threading through my voice. But the night held its silence, and the city waited, breathless, for what would come next. As the sun rose, painting the city in shades of gray and gold, I knew the echoes of the past would guide every step I took forward, even as the future remained uncertain and fraught with danger. My family's story was now mine to continue, and I would carry it with every word I wrote, every scene I staged, every voice I dared to raise against the broken curtain of oppression. The first time I stepped into Amina's cafe, the weight of the city's oppression felt momentarily lifted, replaced by a fragile sense of sanctuary. The narrow door creaked softly as I pushed it open, and the rich scent of freshly ground coffee beans enveloped me like a warm embrace. Low light flickered from vintage lamps, casting gentle shadows on the worn wooden tables and faded brick walls. The quiet murmur of hushed conversations blended with the soft strains of a jazz record spinning in the corner, crafting a haven of normalcy in a city where normal was a luxury. Amina stood behind the counter, a woman whose calm presence was as steady as the tides. Her eyes, warm and knowing, met mine with an unspoken understanding. "You were safe here," she said simply, gesturing toward a secluded corner shielded from the street by heavy curtains and a bookcase. It was a place where whispered words could live without fear. The cafe was a stark contrast to the restless streets outside, where surveillance cameras blinked coldly, and the ever-watchful eyes of the regime sought out every flicker of dissent. Here, amid the clink of ceramic cups and the soft scratch of pen on paper, our small group found a fragile refuge. Milo arrived soon after, his alert gaze softening as he settled into the corner. "This place," he murmured, "it's perfect. Quiet enough to plan, hidden enough to hide." Nina followed, her energetic presence filling the space like sunlight breaking through the gloom. She flopped into a chair, her vibrant style a bold splash of color against the muted tones of the cafe. "We finally have a place to breathe," she said, eyes shining with renewed fire. Our rehearsals began in tentative whispers, the script unfolding slowly beneath the soft glow of the lamps. Each word spoken carried the weight of risk, our voices carefully modulated to avoid drawing attention. The cafe's atmosphere lent a strange intimacy to our work. Every glance, every breath shared between us was charged with the unspoken knowledge of what was at stake. But even in this sanctuary, the city's dark pulse was never far away. Outside, beyond the stained glass windows, Inspector Drax prowled the streets like a predator. His cold, methodical gaze scanned faces and listened for whispers that might betray us. I caught sight of him once, a shadow in the fog, his presence a stark reminder that our fragile bubble could burst at any moment. Inside, the tension was palpable. Nina, ever passionate and sometimes reckless, struggled to contain her fiery spirit. During one rehearsal, her voice rose too high, too forceful, threatening to shatter the silence we so carefully preserved. I gently placed a hand on her arm, pulling her back from the brink. "We must be cautious," I whispered, my heart pounding. "Every word counts." Her eyes flashed with frustration, but the unyielding reality of our situation sobered her. The stakes were immense, and reckless passion could undo everything we fought for. Despite the shadow of danger, the caf blossomed into something more than a meeting place. It became a crucible of hope, a space where our fractured voices could harmonize into a chorus of resistance. The warmth of Amina's smile, the steady rhythm of Milo's reassurances, and Nina's fiery resolve intertwined with my own determination, forging a bond that felt almost unbreakable. Yet beneath this fragile hope, the city's oppressive heartbeat never ceased. Each night, as the cafe's doors closed and the jazz record spun its last notes, I wondered how long our sanctuary could remain untouched. Inspector Drax's relentless pursuit loomed like a storm on the horizon, threatening to sweep away our fragile dream. But for now, in the quiet refuge of Amina's caf, we dared to dream. We dared to imagine a future where our voices would no longer be silenced, where the broken curtain of oppression could finally be drawn aside. As I locked the door behind me that evening, the cool night air whispered promises of both danger and hope. Our fight was far from over, but within these walls, a spark had been ignited, a spark that might one day set the city alight. And so, with cautious hearts and steady hands, we prepared to face whatever came next. Bound together by the fragile sanctuary we had found and the unyielding fire that burned within us all, Alara sat hunched over the worn wooden desk in her cramped apartment, the only light coming from a single desk lamp, whose yellow glow cut through the encroaching darkness like a small beacon. Her hands trembled slightly as she tightened her grip on the pen, the ink flowing rapidly, almost as if it carried a life of its own. Each word she scrawled onto the final pages of the play felt like a defiant shout into the void, a blistering indictment of the regime's relentless censorship and corruption. She paused, breath shallow, heart pounding as the weight of the moment pressed down on her. This was no longer just a script. It was her soul laid bare, a line drawn in the sand. Outside, the city breathed a heavy silence, a suffocating stillness that seemed to seep into the walls and windows, a reminder of the ever-watchful eyes that lurked in the shadows. Yet here, in this small refuge, Alara dared to dream aloud. The final scenes she penned were raw and unyielding, painting vivid pictures of silenced voices and the cracks in the iron grip of power. She imagined the audience's faces, lit by the flickering stage lights, their expressions flickering between fear, recognition, and a flicker of hope. With every line, her conviction grew stronger. If the government sought to erase truth, then she would be the flame that refused to be extinguished. Meanwhile, Milo lingered just beyond the caf's faded faade, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn jacket as he paced restlessly. The hum of quiet conversations and the clinking of cups drifted from inside, a faint warmth amidst the cold night air. But inside his mind, a tempest raged. The memories were sharp and bitter, the days when his voice had mattered, when his journalism had dared to pierce the veil of lies. That voice had been snatched away, silenced by threats and enforced disappearances, leaving behind an echoing void. Yet tonight, working alongside Alara, a spark was rekindling. The script, the play, was more than just words. It was a chance to reclaim lost truths, to shout where silence had been imposed. He glanced at the flickering neon sign across the street, its dull light a metaphor for their fragile existence. Milo's thoughts turned to the risks they all faced. Each rehearsal, each whispered conversation, was a thread woven into a tapestry of defiance. Yet uncertainty gnawed at him. How far could they push before the walls crumbled around them? Inside the meeting room, the atmosphere was electric. Nina stormed in, her eyes blazing with the fierce light of rebellion. Her vibrant style clashed with the drab surroundings, a living testament to her refusal to be muted. "We can't just whisper," she declared, her voice cutting through the low murmur like a trumpet. "If we want change, we have to make noise. We have to be bold." Her words stirred a mixture of admiration and apprehension among the group. Alara met Nina's gaze, feeling the fire but also the recklessness that came with such passion. They were all dancing on a razor's edge, and while courage was their shield, recklessness could be their undoing. The late hours found them huddled close, their voices hushed but fierce as they dissected the incendiary final act of the play. The words on the page were no longer abstract concepts. They breathed with urgency and purpose. Outside, the oppressive silence of the city pressed in like a storm gathering strength, a reminder of the dangers that awaited. But inside the room, amidst the quiet camaraderie, a fragile hope blossomed that even in the darkest hours, art could ignite change. Alara closed the notebook with a final, resolute snap. The script was finished. It was a testament to everything they stood for, a beacon in a city shrouded by fear. But with that triumph came the undeniable truth. The path ahead was fraught with peril. Yet, as she met the tired but determined eyes of Milo and the fiery gaze of Nina, she knew one thing for certain. Silence was no longer an option. The lines they had drawn were on fire, and there was no turning back. Tomorrow, Alara whispered, we take the next step. The room fell silent, the weight of those words hanging in the air, like the first crack of dawn breaking through a long, oppressive night. The back room of Amina's cafe was a far cry from the grand stages Alara had once dreamed of, but tonight it held something far more precious. A sanctuary for voices desperate to be heard. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and brewing coffee, the faint hum of the street beyond muffled by thick curtains. Around the chipped wooden table, the small group gathered, their faces lit intermittently by the flickering overhead bulb that seemed as unstable as their fragile alliance. Alara's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced around the room. Milo sat with his arms crossed, eyes sharp and weary, a thin line pressed against his lips that suggested he was already bracing for conflict. Nina, vibrant even in the dim light, fidgeted restlessly, her expressive face shadowed by uncertainty. Amina, ever the pillar of quiet strength, offered a small, encouraging smile but said nothing, her presence alone a comfort. Taking a deep breath, Alara unfolded the worn script she had poured her soul into. This is only the beginning, she said softly, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. We must trust each other if we read to make this work. The first lines were spoken hesitantly, voices barely above whispers, as if louder speech might summon the ever-watchful eyes of the regime. As the rehearsal progressed, the weight of their secret mission pressed down on them. Nina's fervor clashed with Milo's pragmatism. When Nina suggested a bold, risky scene to confront the audience directly, Milo shot back with a low, tense warning about the dangers they faced. The air crackled with unspoken fears and simmering frustration. Alara watched the exchange with a growing knot of anxiety. Her leadership was being tested not by the government's agents, but by the very people who shared her dream. She knew the stakes were high, but the fractures in their unity could be as deadly as any external threat. Gathering her courage, she raised her hand, calling for silence. We all want the same thing, she said quietly, locking eyes with each member of the group. To expose the truth, to give voice to those silenced. But if we cannot stand together, this will all be for nothing. We must find strength in our differences, not let them tear us apart. A heavy silence followed. Nina's fiery gaze softened, Milo's jaw relaxed, though the tension lingered beneath the surface like a storm waiting to break. Alara felt the immense weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, but also a flicker of hope. If they could weather this first test, perhaps they could face whatever else awaited. As the rehearsal ended, the group dispersed quietly into the night, each lost in their own thoughts. The cafe's warm glow receded behind them, swallowed by the cold darkness of the city. Alara lingered for a moment, her fingers tracing the edges of the script, the words a fragile lifeline tethering her to a future she dared to believe in. Outside, the city breathed its restless, divided breath. Somewhere in the shadows, eyes watched and waited. But within that small room, for a brief moment, trust had been forged in the face of fear. The curtain was beginning to rise on a dangerous new act. The city's heartbeat had always been erratic, a rhythm disrupted by the heavy boots of those who claimed to protect it but only tightened its chains. Tonight, as rain pattered softly against the cafe window, Alara sat motionless, her gaze tracing the silhouettes drifting past the street lamp's sickly yellow glow. Somewhere in that shifting crowd, danger lurked, embodied in the cold, calculating eyes of Inspector Drax. She could feel it, the tightening grip of his watchful presence, like a shadow stretching longer across the city's fractured soul. The caf was a sanctuary, a fragile bubble of warmth amidst the encroaching chill of surveillance. But Alara knew better than to let comfort dull her senses. Every whispered conversation, every clandestine meeting was a defiant act teetering on the edge of discovery. Her fingers traced the edges of a folded note, the ink slightly smudged from hurried writing. Milo's last message had been clear: Drax's patrols have increased. Communications are compromised. Be careful. The weight of those words pressed against her chest like a stone. As the door creaked open, a gust carried the scent of damp earth and nervous energy. Milo slipped inside, his usual confident stride replaced by a cautious shuffle. His eyes flickered with a mixture of worry and determination. They were listening closer, he murmured, sliding into the seat opposite her. The flickering candlelight danced across his face, revealing the faint lines of sleepless nights. Intercepted chatter suggests they're reclosing in on our network. We can't risk unencrypted messages anymore. Alara nodded, the knot in her stomach tightening. The play, their fragile thread of resistance, was becoming a beacon that drew the eyes of predators. Yet, the fire within her refused to dim. We adapt, she said quietly. We become shadows ourselves. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming a relentless tempo that echoed the growing tension inside her. Later that evening, in the cramped back room of a nondescript building, tension thickened the stale air. Joran stood by the window, the city lights flickering behind him like distant stars swallowed by darkness. His hands were clenched at his sides, jaw tight. When he turned to face Alara, the lines of conflict etched deep into his features betrayed his inner turmoil. You don't understand what you're risking, he said, voice low but edged with urgency. This isn't just about art or truth. It's about survival, mine, yours, all of ours. Alara met his gaze steadily, and silence isn't survival. Not when it comes at the cost of our souls. Their words hung between them, a fragile bridge over a widening chasm. The political and personal collided here, revealing wounds that no allegiance could easily mend. Meanwhile, Melo's fingers flew over the keyboard in a cramped apartment, lit only by the cold glow of his monitor. Lines of code scrolled across the screen as he probed deeper into government networks, searching for a crack in the armor. They're retightening the net, he muttered, eyes darting rapidly. Encrypted channels flagged, phone lines tapped. Every message we send is a risk. The burden of silence was heavy, but the need to communicate burned hotter still. Suddenly the door burst open, and Nina stumbled inside, breathless, her vibrant energy dimmed but unbroken. They were near the rehearsal space, she said urgently, voice trembling. Someone spotted Drax's men just blocks away. We have to move now. The room fell into a tense hush. Fear rippled beneath their shared resolve, a reminder of the stakes they faced. We can't stop, Alara said firmly, not now. As they gathered their things in hurried silence, the city outside seemed to pulse with a darkness that sought to swallow them whole. But within their small circle, a defiant light flickered, fragile, yes, but unyielding. Alara's thoughts raced. Every step forward was fraught with peril, every breath a challenge. Yet, the shadows that encroached only sharpened her resolve. The broken curtain they sought to raise was no longer just a metaphor. It was the thin veil between oppression and freedom, and they were poised to tear it down no matter the cost. And as the night deepened, so too did the promise of dawn. The oppressive atmosphere of the city weighed heavily on Alara as she stepped from the caf into the chill of the night. The rain had softened to a drizzle, but the dampness clung to her skin like the ever-present eyes watching from the darkness. Each footstep echoed against the wet pavement, a solitary drumbeat in a city that had learned to whisper in fear. Her mind replayed the conversation with Joran, their voices still resonating deep within her. The brother she once knew seemed a stranger, now a man shackled by his duty to a regime she sought to dismantle. Yet beneath his warnings, she sensed a flicker of the brother's care, twisted and buried beneath layers of caution and fear. Inside her apartment, The walls felt both confining and protective. She moved to the window, peering down into the street below. The city was alive with silent tension. Every shadow, every distant siren was a reminder of the fragile balance between resistance and ruin. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of her encrypted communicator. Milo's message blinked into existence: emergency meeting, new safe house, midnight. Alara's pulse quickened. The tightening scrutiny meant they had no room for error. Every decision was a gamble with fate. She gathered her few belongings, the weight of the script in her bag heavier than ever. This play was more than words on paper. It was a beacon for the silenced, a rallying cry against the darkness. As she slipped into the night, the city's secrets whispered around her, and the shadows lengthened, threatening to consume all who dared defy the silence. But Alara was no longer just a witness to this fractured world, she was its quiet storm. The battle for freedom was no longer a distant dream. It was here, in the shadows, where courage was forged and voices refused to be silenced, and the night was far from over. The city's chill seeped through the cracked window panes of the cafe where Alara sat, the low hum of whispered conversations around her blending with the clinking of cups and the rustle of newspapers. She watched Joran across the table, his eyes sharp but shadowed with a wariness that mirrored her own. His voice was low, barely above the murmur of the room, yet every word carried the weight of a warning that seemed to echo louder in the confined space. Alara, he began, fingers tapping nervously against the chipped ceramic of his cup. This isn't just about art or expression anymore. The government's tightening its grip. They're rewatching closer than ever. Your play, it's more dangerous than you realize. She met his gaze steadily, the difficult tension between them thick enough to taste. I know the risks, Joran, but silence is the real danger. Your idealism blinds you. You're not just risking yourself, but everyone involved. His words were edged with both fear and frustration, a conflicted blend that stung more than any accusation. Their conversation spiraled into the depths of their fractured history, each word dredging up old wounds and ideological divides that had festered for years. Joran, now a cog in the very regime she sought to expose, represented a world she had tried to leave behind yet could not escape. Meanwhile, Milo sat in the cramped back room of Amina's cafe, the glow of his laptop casting sharp shadows on his face. He was hunched over, eyes scanning encrypted messages, each ping a reminder of the fragile network they depended on. The silence around him was heavy, punctuated only by the steady tapping of keys and the occasional sharp intake of breath, as he decoded a new threat or a whispered call for help. His past as a journalist, once vibrant and outspoken, now felt like a distant life swallowed by censorship and fear. He wrestled with the burden of exposure, the creeping dread that any misstep could unravel everything they had built. Yet beneath the anxiety was a rekindled flame of purpose that pushed him beyond his reservations, binding him to Alara's cause. In contrast, Nina's restless energy was a storm waiting to break. Her vibrant style and expressive face belied the fierce passion that drove her every action. But that passion often spilled over into recklessness. One evening, ignoring Alara's urgent cautions, she confronted a stranger loitering near their rehearsal space, someone whose presence had unsettled the group for days. The confrontation was swift and chaotic. Nina's boldness sparked a heated exchange that drew unwanted attention, forcing the group into a hasty retreat and shattering the fragile veil of secrecy they had cultivated so carefully. The echoes of that moment reverberated through their circle, sowing doubt and fear. Later, under the dim glow of a lone lamp, Alara sat alone in her modest apartment. The weight of fractured loyalties pressed down on her, a web of personal betrayals and political fractures that threatened to unravel their mission. Her thoughts wandered to Joran's warnings, Milo's haunted resolve, and Nina's reckless courage. Each represented a piece of the fractured city she sought to heal. Her fingers traced the worn edges of her script, the words a testament to hope and defiance. Despite the fear that clawed at her heart, her resolve hardened. The road ahead was fraught with peril, but surrender was not an option. She would protect her vision and her allies, no matter the cost. The city outside remained silent, but inside Alara's mind, a storm of determination and doubt raged on, setting the stage for the battles yet to come. The small cafe that had become their sanctuary buzzed with the low murmur of cautious voices and the faint clatter of porcelain cups. Shadows pooled in the corners, swallowing faces and words alike, as if the darkness itself sought to protect their fragile hope. Alara sat at the worn wooden table, her fingers trembling slightly as she folded and unfolded a crumpled page of her script. The air was thick with unspoken fear, each heartbeat a loud drum in the silence. "We need to be careful," Milo whispered, leaning in, his eyes darting toward the dim entrance. "They were watching, more than ever." Alara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Her mind raced back to the last rehearsal, that fragile moment when Nina's fiery spirit had almost unraveled their tight-knit group. She remembered the reckless words and rushing footsteps, the danger that had followed like a shadow. And now, the worst had come to pass. A sudden sharp tap on the window shattered the fragile quiet. Alara's breath caught as the unmistakable sound of heavy boots echoed in the narrow street outside. The door burst open, splintering the fragile calm, and cold eyes scanned the room. Inspector Drax's presence was a suffocating weight pressing down on their sanctuary. "Government agents," Milo hissed, standing protectively in front of Alara. "They've been tipped off." Panic rippled through the group like wildfire. Papers fluttered to the floor as they scrambled to hide their work. But the damage was done. The betrayal was real, and it cut deeper than any blade. Alara's gaze locked on Milo, the man she trusted most. Yet, even in his eyes, she saw the shadows of doubt and fear. "Who?" she demanded, voice cracking. "Who would do this to us?" Silence answered her. It was a question that hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet understood. The sting of betrayal was a poison that seeped into every corner of their fragile alliance. Nina's vibrant presence was suddenly a flash of color amid the gray despair. "It's my fault," she burst out, voice trembling with guilt and defiance. "I was careless. I let my anger get the better of me." Alara reached out, but Nina had already turned away, the door slamming behind her like a final act of rebellion. The group was fractured, their unity pierced by recklessness and fear. As the agents ransacked the room, Alara's heart pounded with a mixture of dread and resolve. The scattered scripts lay like fallen soldiers on the floor, their fragile message at the mercy of cold hands. In that moment, Alara understood the true cost of their fight. The walls of censorship and fear were closing in, but within her, a fierce ember of defiance ignited. She would not let this betrayal silence them. "We'll find a way," she vowed quietly, voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "We have to. For everyone who's been silenced." The night outside was a cloak of uncertainty, but inside, a new resolve was born. Alara's fight was far from over, it had only just begun. The stakes were higher, the dangers more real, but so too was the courage that burned in her chest. The broken curtain would not fall without a fight. And as the heavy footsteps faded into the night, Alara made a silent promise. The voices that had been silenced would rise again, louder and stronger than before. The world was watching, and she was ready to be heard. The soft chime of the cafe doorbell was drowned out by the heavy silence that had settled over Amina's cafe. Once a refuge of warmth and whispered hope, it now felt like a fragile shell, trembling under the weight of unseen eyes. Alara moved swiftly among the familiar tables, gathering scripts, notes, and props with practiced efficiency. Her fingers brushed over the worn pages of her script, a silent anchor amid the mounting chaos. Milo was already by the back door, his expression taut as he checked the locks, his eyes darting toward every shadow that flickered in the dim light. Nina paced restlessly near the window, her vibrant energy subdued, her gaze fixed on the street beyond as if willing the danger to pass them by. "We can't stay here," Milo whispered, voice tight with urgency. "Drax is closing in faster than we thought. The cafe's been watched, and we caught wind of arrests in the neighborhood last night." Alara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. The city was tightening its grip, the oppressive silence growing heavier with each passing day. The whispers of dissent, once carried on breathless winds, were now smothered beneath the weight of fear. Yet, within that suffocation, a fragile spark remained, fueled by their shared resolve. "Where will we go?" Nina asked, her voice cracking with a mix of desperation and defiance. "We scatter for now," Alara replied, voice low but steady. "Regroup when the time is right. We can't risk losing everything tonight." The group moved like shadows, slipping into the night with only the faintest sounds marking their passage. The city streets, usually alive with murmurs and footsteps, now thrummed with the distant echoes of sirens and the pounding boots of patrols. Alara's breath caught as she paused beneath a flickering street lamp, the cold air sharp against her skin. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, a tangible reminder of the silenced voices that filled the city with a haunting absence. "Stay close," Milo urged, his eyes scanning the alleys with practiced vigilance. They navigated the labyrinth of streets, hearts pounding in rhythm with the distant clamor. Every shadow could conceal a threat. Every footstep might herald discovery. Yet, amidst the fear, Alara felt a fierce pulse of determination steadying her. The play, their message had to live. Their voices, though silenced by force, could not be extinguished. Later, in a cramped, dimly lit room far from the safety of the caf, Milo sat hunched over a battered laptop. The soft clatter of his fingers on the keyboard was a fragile lifeline, sending encrypted messages to their network of allies scattered throughout the city. Nina stood guard by the door, her nerves taut, every creak of the floorboards or distant shout, sending a prickling wave of tension through the room. "We need to keep the play moving," Milo said without looking up. "If the government's closing the space, we have to find new ways to reach people, even if it's just whispers for now." Alara watched them both, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. Alone, she retreated to a shadowed corner, clutching her notebook, the heart of their cause. The silence was almost suffocating, punctuated only by the distant drone of the city that felt both alive and eerily still. In that quiet, the voices of those who had been silenced echoed loudest in her mind. Memories of her family, of those lost and silenced, surged through her. The cost of truth was high, but the price of silence was far greater. Her fingers traced the familiar lines of the script, each word a declaration of defiance, each scene a mirror held up to the oppressive world outside. As dawn crept cautiously over the horizon, Alara's resolve crystallized. The city might be under siege, its streets patrolled by fear and suspicion, but the spirit of resistance lived on. The curtain might have been torn, the stage darkened for now, but the play was far from over. And somewhere in the shadows and whispers, hope still stirred, ready to rise again. The night stretched long and uncertain, but Alara knew this was only the beginning. The fight for voices, for truth, for freedom was a battle waged not just in grand gestures, but in quiet courage and unyielding hearts. As she folded the script close and slipped it safely into her coat, Alara glanced once more toward the darkened city. Somewhere beyond the suffocating silence, others listened. Others waited, and together they would break the silence. They had to. The city was under siege, but not defeated. Not yet. The room was cloaked in shadows, save for the slender beam of a flickering candle that danced across the pages sprawled before me. My pen hovered hesitantly over the final lines of the script, the words that had taken months of whispered conversations, stolen moments, and sleepless nights to bring to life. Every letter etched on this yellowed paper was a testament to the courage of silenced voices, to the truth I was determined to unveil. Fatigue clung to my limbs like a second skin, yet beneath it stirred an unyielding flame. The city beyond the window pressed inward, its fractured streets and shuttered faces a constant reminder of the stakes. In this divided place, where shadows stretched long over freedom, the act of creation itself was an act of rebellion. I exhaled slowly, the weight of doubt pressing down like a storm cloud. Could this fragile script, inked in secrecy, unravel the iron grip of censorship? Would our whispered defiance echo beyond these four walls, or be swallowed by fear and silence? The questions gnawed at me, but surrender was a luxury I could not afford. The quiet chime of the caf door stirred me from my reverie. Milo stepped inside, his casual gait belying the tension itched around his eyes. Behind him, Nina followed, her vibrant energy contained yet unmistakable, like a wildfire barely restrained. Their presence was a balm, a reminder that I was not alone in this fight. "It's done," I said softly, sliding the last page across the table. Mello picked it up, eyes scanning the lines with reverence and resolve. "We have to go forward," I added, voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "No more waiting." Nina's smile was fierce, a flash of defiant light. "Then let's make them listen." Plans were whispered in the back room of Amina's cafe, a sanctuary amid the suffocating city. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by the rustle of scripts and the soft cadence of rehearsed lines. Each whispered word carried the weight of 1,000 silenced cries, every stolen glance a reminder of the dangers lurking beyond these walls. Milo adjusted the makeshift lighting, casting fragmented shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper. "We can't afford mistakes," he murmured, eyes sharp. "The government's eyes are everywhere." I nodded, feeling the pressure of his words settle deep within me. Yet beneath the fear, a fierce determination stirred. This play was more than a script, it was a beacon, a crack in the curtain of oppression. As rehearsals progressed, bonds deepened. Nina's passion ignited our spirits, her boldness pushing us beyond caution. Milo's pragmatism grounded our fervor, his technical skills weaving the fragile threads of secrecy. And Amina's quiet support provided a haven where hope could breathe. Late one evening, I found myself at the window, gazing out over the city's fractured skyline. The broken curtain of night mirrored the cracks beginning to form in the regime's control, fragile, uncertain, yet undeniable. The distant hum of the city was a lullaby of defiance. A single breath escaped my lips, a prayer and a promise. Whatever the cost, the play would be performed. Our voices would no longer be silenced. The breaking point had come, and with it, the fragile birth of a revolution. As dawn crept over the horizon, washing the city in pale light, I felt the stirrings of hope, quiet, fragile, but fiercely alive. The stage was set. Now all that remained was to raise the curtain. The basement was alive with a nervous energy that thrummed beneath the surface like a secret heartbeat. Alara stood just beyond the flickering shadows cast by a cluster of bare bulbs strung overhead, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the folds of her simple, dark tunic. Around her, the small crowd of collaborators and audience members whispered in hushed tones, their breaths mingling with the faint rustle of paper scripts and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards beneath their feet. This was no ordinary theater. The walls bore the scars of peeling paint and dampness, but within this hidden sanctuary, a fragile hope was being forged. Alara's gaze swept over the faces gathered here, some young, some older, all marked by the city's oppression yet alight with a rebellious spark. Each had risked much to be here, to bear witness to a truth too dangerous to speak aloud in the daylight. Nina stood poised near the makeshift stage, her expressive face a mask of both excitement and resolve. The vibrant streaks in her hair were subdued tonight, toned down to avoid attracting unwanted attention, but her eyes flickered with the same fierce passion Alara had come to rely on. Milo was stationed near the back, alert and ready, his usual casual demeanor tempered by the gravity of the moment. As the signal was given, the murmur faded into a profound silence. Nina stepped forward, her voice rising steadily, cutting through the still air with words that had been forged in fear, but delivered with fire. The play unfolded, each line a sting aimed at the heart of the regime's lies, each scene a mirror reflecting the city's fractured soul. Alara felt her own breath catch as she watched the audience lean in, rapt and unblinking. Faces once shadowed now glowed with tears, clenched fists, and whispered affirmations. The weight of risk was immense. One wrong move could bring the heavy hand of Minister Corbyn's forces crashing down upon them all. Yet here, in this fragile moment, defiance blossomed, raw and unyielding. The final scene fell into a heavy silence, the echoes of the play's message lingering like smoke. Alara's heart pounded fiercely in her chest, a tempest of exhilaration and fear. She understood, with an aching clarity, that this night was a turning point not just for her, but for every voice craving to be heard in this divided city. As the audience began to disperse quietly into the shadows from which they came, Alara caught Milo's eye. In that glance, unspoken yet profound, past a shared vow, their fight was far from over. The curtain had risen on a new stage, and the fragile cracks in the regime's control were starting to show. But beneath the triumph lay a simmering dread. The regime's eyes were everywhere. The risk of discovery loomed large, a shadow threatening to snuff out this fragile flame of hope. Alara knew that the true test was only just beginning. With a deep breath, she stepped into the night beyond the basement's hidden door, the cool air brushing against her face like a promise. The city was watching, and so was the broken curtain. The underground theater was alive with a fragile energy that night, the kind born of whispered hopes and daring dreams. The small crowd, huddled in the cavernous basement beneath the city, held their breath as the stage lights cast long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Alara stood just out of sight, her heart pounding in rhythm with the actors' voices, each line of her forbidden play striking chords of truth that the regime sought to silence. From the wings, she watched Nina deliver a passionate monologue, her expressive face illuminated by a single spotlight. The audience was rapt, their eyes shining with a mixture of fear and hope. It was a moment suspended in time, a fragile beacon of resistance in a city strangled by censorship. Milo stood near the back, eyes scanning the room vigilantly, his fingers twitching with the urge to intervene if danger appeared. But danger was already there. A sudden crash shattered the tense quiet, and before anyone could react, the heavy steel door burst open. Harsh, commanding voices echoed through the room as government agents flooded the space. The spotlight flickered and died, plunging the theater into chaos. Panic rippled through the audience. Some tried to flee, others froze, caught between fear and disbelief. Alara's breath caught as strong hands seized her arm. She struggled, but the grip was unyielding. Milo shouted her name, but the sound was swallowed by the cacophony of shouts and orders. Nina was dragged away, her vibrant spirit dimmed by the harsh reality crashing down on them all. Dragged into the cold night air, Alara was shoved into a waiting vehicle. The city's oppressive silence was replaced by the harsh whine of sirens and the pounding of her own heart. Her mind raced, memories flashing past her family silenced, the countless nights spent writing in secret, the stolen rehearsals in Amina's cafe. All of it had led to this moment of reckoning. In the sterile interrogation room, harsh fluorescent lights burned down on her weary face. Across the table, Minister Corbin sat with an expression carved from stone cold, calculating, unyielding. His voice was low, laced with menace as he recited the charges: sedition, subversion, and the dangerous act of spreading dissent through art. "You think your words can topple the order we have built?" Corbin sneered, his eyes boring into hers. "You are nothing but a threat to the peace we maintain." Alara met his gaze, the fire of defiance flaring despite the exhaustion and fear. "Truth is a force stronger than your fear," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Corbin's lips curled into a bitter smile. "We will see how long that fire burns in the darkness." The public condemnation that followed was a brutal spectacle, designed to crush not just Alara, but the flickering hope she represented. Images of her arrest were broadcast, her words twisted and weaponized by the regime, yet beneath the surface, something unexpected stirred. Whispers of her courage spread through the underground, emboldening others to resist. Back in the abandoned theater, the silence was deafening. Scattered props lay in disarray, the broken curtain hanging limply, a stark symbol of a dream violently interrupted. But even as the regime sought to silence her, Alara's spirit burned brighter than ever. The fight was far from over, and the curtain, though broken, had begun to fracture the walls of oppression. As the city slept uneasily beneath the shadow of fear, a new chapter of resistance was quietly being written, one word, one voice, one act of courage at a time. The question lingered in the air: how long could the regime hold back the tide of truth? And more importantly, who would rise when the curtain finally fell? The night outside was cold, but inside Alara's heart, a fierce warmth kindled, a defiant hope that no darkness could extinguish. The exposure was brutal, but it had revealed a truth the regime could never fully erase, the power of voices that refused to be silenced. The heavy steel door groaned shut behind me, sealing off the faint hum of the city beyond. The room was dim, sterile, and cold, an office stripped of warmth, where power was measured not in comfort but in control. Minister Corbin sat behind an imposing oak desk, his posture rigid, eyes cold and unyielding. A faint gleam of polished brass from the desk lamp cast long shadows across his sharp features, making him look less a man and more a sentinel of the regime's iron grip. "Alara," he said, voice low and clipped, "I suppose you expected this meeting." I met his gaze without flinching, feeling the weight of every moment, every breath. "I did. I wanted to speak to you directly." Corbin's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. "To what end? You know your actions have consequences." I drew in a steadying breath, the memories of whispered rehearsals, coded messages, and stolen moments flooding through me. My play speaks the truth. The people deserve to hear it. The city deserves to know what's been hidden beneath the surface for too long. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Truth is subjective, Alara. What you call truth threatens the order we built, the fragile peace in a city divided." "Peace built on silence is no peace at all," I replied, voice firm despite the flutter of nerves in my chest. "You fear chaos, but repression breeds fear and resentment. You can't silence voices forever." Corbin's eyes darkened, but for a moment, the cold mask slipped. His fingers trembled as they brushed over a thick dossier on his desk, reports, names, surveillance logs. "Do you know what I fear? Not rebellion, not dissent. I fear the collapse of everything, the ruin of a city that could fall apart without strict control." I saw then the man beneath the minister, a man haunted by past failures, burdened by responsibility yet trapped by cynicism. "Control is a cage," I said softly, "and cages break." The room thickened with silence, the tension winding tighter between us. Corbin's jaw clenched. "You are brave, Alara. Foolhardy, but brave." I gave the faintest nod, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "Bravery is all I have left." The conversation lingered in my mind long after I left the office. The oppressive silence outside the door felt heavier, but inside me, a spark had ignited. Despite the scars of confrontation, my resolve was stronger, a quiet, fierce determination to keep fighting, to keep speaking, to keep breaking the silence. As the city outside continued its uneasy sleep under watchful eyes, I knew the battle was far from over. But I now carried with me a deeper understanding that even in the face of cold power and cynicism, the human spirit's yearning for freedom could not be extinguished. And so, with every step away from that room, I carried hope raw, defiant, and unbroken. The cold seeped into my bones, but I barely noticed as the fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow against the barren walls of the interrogation room. The metal chair beneath me was unyielding. The thin blanket they'd tossed over my shoulders did little to soften the chill. My hands trembled slightly as they rested on my lap, but my eyes remained fixed forward, steady and unblinking. Inspector Drax sat across from me, his face a mask of cold professionalism, but his eyes, sharp and unrelenting, searched for any crack, any weakness to exploit. "Alara," he began, voice low and controlled, "you understand the gravity of your actions. The play, the defiance it threatens the stability of our city. Tell us who else is involved. Help us stop this madness." I swallowed the lump in my throat, the silence stretching between us like a taut wire. My mind wandered briefly to the warm light of Amina's calf, the hushed whispers of my friends in the shadows, the quickened pulse of hope that had once filled those secret meetings. I bit back the fear, the panic. This was a battle of wills, mine against his, truth against oppression. "I'm alone in this," I said softly, voice steady despite the storm inside. "The play is mine. No one else needs to suffer for it." Drax's lips tightened, a flicker of frustration flashing in his eyes before he masked it again. The questions came in waves, relentless, probing, but I answered little, revealing nothing that could endanger my friends or the fragile resistance we had built. Hours blurred into days. The isolation was suffocating. The silence of my cell pressed down on me, threatening to drown out my resolve. But in the quiet, Memories surfaced: Amina's comforting smile, Milo's steady presence, Nina's fiery spirit. I clung to them like lifelines, their voices echoing in my mind, reminding me I was not truly alone. Outside these walls, the city was shifting beneath the surface. In a cramped basement, lit only by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, Milo and Nina worked tirelessly. Scattered papers, hastily scribbled notes, and a small radio transmitter formed the heart of their operation. They whispered, coordinated, and risked everything to spread the play's forbidden message. Each transmission, each copied script that passed from hand to hand was a beacon of defiance, a crack in the iron grip of the regime. Milo's fingers trembled as he adjusted the radio's dials, his usual wit tempered by the weight of responsibility. Nina's eyes burned with determination, her impulsiveness now channeled into calculated acts of rebellion. Together they became the pulse of the movement, keeping the fire alive when I was forced into silence. Meanwhile, Inspector Drax sat before screens displaying endless surveillance footage. His cold gaze tracked the movements of suspected dissidents, his mind racing to anticipate their next move. But the more he watched, the more the cracks appeared: unexpected gatherings, whispered conversations, the rapid spread of forbidden words. His usual confidence wavered just for a moment, revealing a hint of the chaos he feared would unravel his carefully constructed order. Back in my cell, the nights were the hardest. Darkness brought the memories closer, the loneliness sharper. Yet, even in the bleakness, I found moments of quiet hope: a whispered line from the play, the imagined faces of those who dared to listen, the knowledge that our voices, though silenced, still echoed. One evening, as the guards changed shifts and footsteps echoed down the corridor, I pressed my palm to the cold wall, feeling the faint vibrations of the city beyond. The broken curtain was no longer just a symbol, it was becoming a reality. The regime's control was fracturing, and though I was trapped, my spirit remained unbroken. The question lingered in every breath I took: how long before the silence shattered completely? How long before the voices we had fought so hard to free would rise in unison, unstoppable and fierce? As dawn crept through the narrow slit of my cell window, I closed my eyes and whispered a promise to myself, to my friends, and to the city that still waited for its freedom. The fight was far from over, and when the curtain finally broke, nothing would ever be the same again. The city's shadows had grown longer, but beneath them flickered a new, fragile light. Even as Alara remained confined, her spirit refused to be shackled. The forbidden play, once whispered in the quiet corners and hidden pockets of the city, now moved like a silent current through the veins of a restless population. Milo sat hunched over a battered wooden table in the basement of an abandoned building, the faint hum of the city above barely audible through the thick concrete walls. His fingers trembled slightly as he passed around fresh copies of the script, each page a dangerous manifesto against the iron grip of censorship. "We have to be careful," Milo murmured to Nina, who paced the room with restless energy. "Every copy is a risk, but without these words, the silence will swallow us whole." Nina's eyes shone with fierce determination. "They can't silence us all. Not if we keep moving, keep speaking. Alara's words are alive, they re our weapon now." The air was thick with tension and hope, the scent of damp concrete mingling with the faint trace of candle wax. Outside, the city's pulse beat in a dissonant rhythm, the distant clang of metal shutters, hurried footsteps, the sharp bark of a guard's command. Inside, the quiet urgency of revolution took root. Meanwhile, in a stark interrogation room miles away, Alara sat with her back straight despite the cold biting at her skin. Her eyes, sharp and alert, caught every shadow, every movement beyond the thin door. Through the faintest crack, she caught whispers, snippets of conversations carried on the wind, stories of the play's clandestine spread. A faint smile tugged at her lips, bittersweet but resolute. Her sacrifice, the price she paid, was not in vain. Each whispered reading, each furtive meeting under the veil of night was a thread weaving a larger tapestry of defiance. Back in the hidden courtyard, a small cluster of citizens gathered under the cloak of dusk. Candles flickered like stars brought low, casting wavering shadows over faces etched with exhaustion and hope. They passed the script from hand to hand, voices low but charged with the weight of suppressed truths. This is what we needed, a young woman whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It's like the city is breathing again. Nina's voice rose above the murmurs in a cramped, safe house later that evening, her passion igniting the room. We were not just reading words, we were reclaiming our voices. Alara showed us that fear does not own us. It's time to stand together. Milo moved swiftly among the crowd, mapping out plans, coordinating safe routes, and organizing future gatherings. The room pulsed with a potent mix of fear and exhilaration, a fragile but growing sense of community in the face of oppression. The movement was nascent, vulnerable to the regime's ruthless reach, but it was alive. Every whispered reading, every secret rehearsal, every candlelit gathering was a rebellion of spirit. And though the city still trembled under the shadow of fear, the broken curtain that Alara had torn open was no longer just a symbol of repression, it was the first crack in a wall that might, someday, crumble entirely. As the night deepened, Milo and Nina exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. This was only the beginning. The ripples of defiance were spreading, and the city would never be the same. But the question hung heavy in the air. How long could they keep the flame alive without being extinguished? And what sacrifices would the dawn demand? Alara's story was no longer hers alone. It had become the story of a city yearning to breathe free, of silenced voices finding harmony in the dark, and of courage that refused to be broken. The evening air was sharp as I stepped out onto the cracked pavement, the cold biting through the thin fabric of my coat. Freedom tasted strange, unfamiliar in my mouth after the sterile confines of the detention center. The city around me was both the same and profoundly changed. Under the flickering glow of streetlights, shadows stretched long and uncertain, echoing the fractured state of this divided place. As my breath formed little clouds in the cold air, I caught sight of a small scrawl of graffiti on a nearby wall, a roughly painted broken curtain, its threads unraveling. A simple symbol, yet potent. It had begun appearing in pockets across the city, whispered among the underground like a secret promise. I moved slowly, cautious to avoid drawing attention yet eager to reconnect with the world I had left behind. The risks were no less real now, if anything. The regime's vigilance had sharpened, but something fundamental had shifted. The silence I had lived under was breaking, fragment by fragment. My mind drifted to Milo and Nina, their steadfast presence a balm during the darkest hours. We had been a fragile constellation of hope before, but now, that hope flickered like a stubborn flame refusing to be snuffed out. My feet carried me to the cafe, a sanctuary of dim light and whispered plans. Inside, Milo's eyes lifted from the scattered papers as I entered, a mixture of relief and determination shining through his ever-watchful gaze. Nina, vibrant as ever despite the tension, leaned forward, her expressive face alight with urgency. Together, we pored over the messages passed along secret channels, the pulse of the city's resistance beating stronger with every coded note. The walls seemed to breathe with the energy of our shared purpose, muffled sounds of distant unrest threading in through the windows. The cafe was more than a meeting place. It was a crucible where fear and courage met, forging a fragile but unyielding resolve. As the night deepened, plans crystallized a whispered call to action, a reminder that every voice mattered, no matter how faint. Outside, the city square was slowly filling, a gathering of kindred spirits drawn by the promise of change. A makeshift stage stood at its center, draped with a tattered curtain, the same symbol that had haunted my thoughts since my release. The fabric fluttered weakly in the breeze, threads hanging loose like the fraying control of those who sought to silence us. The crowd was small but fierce. Their whispered chants wove a tapestry of defiance that hummed through the chilled air. Each face reflected a mixture of hope and fear, the knowledge that this moment was both precious and perilous. I stepped forward to join them, feeling the weight of my recent ordeal settle into a quiet strength. The broken curtain was no longer just a symbol, it was a beacon, a crack in the monolith of oppression, where light might yet seep through. High above, in the cold sterility of his office, Minister Corbin watched through fractured glass. His reflection fractured like the city itself, a man once filled with idealism now reduced to a cold, calculating figure. News reports flickered on screens around him, hinting at the unrest that had begun to ripple beyond control. His eyes, usually impassive, betrayed a flicker of unease, a recognition that the walls he had built were beginning to crumble. Yet, despite the danger, the fear, the unknown that loomed ahead, a new chapter was opening for us all. The cracks in the curtain were widening, and with them, the promise of a city ready to reclaim its voice. As I stood amidst the gathering crowd, the weight of my scars and sacrifices felt both heavy and sacred. This was no longer just my fight, it was ours. And together, we would write what came next. But the road ahead was fraught with peril, and every step would test the fragile hope that had begun to kindle in the hearts of a fractured city. The question remained, how far were we willing to go to break the silence for good? The night held its breath, waiting for the answer. The city was waking beneath her feet, the first light of dawn spilling like liquid gold over the horizon, casting long, slender shadows across rooftops and alleys alike. Alara stood alone on the small rooftop behind the cafe that had once served as their secret meeting place, the cool morning air brushing lightly against her skin, carrying with it the faint hum of awakening life below. She felt the weight of everything that had passed, the fear, the loss, the betrayals, but beneath it all was a pulse, steady and strong hope. It had been months since the curtain had fallen on that fateful performance, months since the city's iron grip had tried to snuff out the flickering flame of dissent. Yet here she was, scarred but unbroken, a symbol not just of resistance but of renewal. Her eyes, sharp and clear despite the sleepless nights, scanned the skyline, a fractured city, yes, but one where cracks in the regime's control were now visible, thin but spreading like veins of light. Behind her, the soft clatter of footsteps announced Milo's arrival. He joined her silently, their shared history written in the lines of their faces, and the quiet understanding between them. "The others are gathering," he said, nodding toward the street below where the city was stirring. Together, they descended into the familiar dimness of the cafe's back room, where the underground theater community had once huddled in whispered secrecy. Now, the space buzzed with renewed energy. Faces once etched with fear now gleamed with determination. Nina's vibrant presence was unmistakable, though tempered by the recent trials. Her passion burned brighter than ever. "We were ready," Nina said, her voice steady, eyes meeting Alara's with fierce conviction. "This is our moment." Alara nodded, feeling the surge of strength that came from solidarity. They spoke in hushed tones about new scripts, about performances that would slip through the cracks of censorship, about messages carried by art that no iron fist could crush. Their plans were cautious but bold, an act of quiet defiance, a reclaiming of voices long silenced. Later that day, Alara found herself sitting across from Joran in a dimly lit cafe, the tension between them a fragile thread woven with years of distance and conflict. Joran's eyes were tired but held a glimmer of something she hadn't seen in a long time, hope. "You're a different person now," he admitted quietly, stirring his coffee. "I had to be," Alara replied softly. "This city needs more than fear, it needs truth." Their conversation was a delicate dance of past wounds and tentative reconciliation, a reminder that even in a divided city, bridges could be rebuilt, however cautiously. As dusk fell, the city streets began to transform. Posters bearing the broken curtain symbol appeared overnight, pasted on walls, lampposts, and corners where only the brave dared to look. Passers-by whispered, eyes flickering with recognition and a spark of courage. The movement was no longer confined to shadowed rooms. It was seeping into the streets, carried on the breath of those unwilling to be silenced. Alara stood once more on the rooftop as night deepened, the city alive beneath a canopy of stars. She felt the familiar flutter of fear. The regime was still watching, still waiting to strike. But alongside it was a fiercer emotion, defiant hope. The journey ahead was uncertain, roads fraught with danger and sacrifice. Yet in this moment, she embraced the power of her art, the strength of her community, and the unyielding spirit of a city longing to be free. The stage was set anew. The curtain had broken, and from its shards, a new story was beginning to unfold. "This is just the beginning," Alara whispered to the night, her voice steady and clear, a vow and a promise intertwined. And somewhere in the depths of the city, a chorus of silenced voices began to rise, weaving together into a song that could no longer be ignored.